I always thought to be famous, I had to be on a baseball card. But with social media sites, I'm a superstar influencer.
Hi, everyone. This is Will O'Toole welcoming you to another edition of Park Ridge Sports History. As always, I'm going to make it an as always. I do want to welcome you to the show and thank Howard for producing it. But I want to return to Ball 4. I know I did an episode last year on Ball 4, and I figured, why not? It's the greatest baseball book in the last 50, 60 years, probably in the 20th century, the best baseball book. There is The Long Season by Jim Brosnan, which you could actually argue Ball 4 mirrored itself after, except that Ball 4 is a little bit more risque than Jim Brosnan's book, A Long Baseball Season. Brosnan's was spent with the St. Louis Cardinals, and of course, what makes, and I think this is what resonates more, is that Ball 4 is probably one of our only connections as baseball fans and historians of the game to really the Seattle Pilots, because they only lasted that year. Barely, I don't even think they lasted a full year, because less than, I think, 48 hours to opening day in 1970, the Pilots are kaput and Bud Selig buys the franchise. And I think technically, and this could be law, something to do with maybe real estate and all the rest of it, but the Milwaukee Brewers rise up from the ashes of the Seattle Pilots. But and even though I think they assumed all the debt of the Pilots, I think for tax purposes and all the rest of it, the Seattle Pilots went, let's say, Chapter 7 or defunct, and then the Brewers rose from that, taking their players and all the rest of it. But how we see it today is that the Pilots became the Brewers, and that the Pilots, unless we had 1970s book about the 69 Pilots by Jim Bouton, we would know little or nothing, or not have the same perspective and point of view of the Seattle Pilots baseball team. Now, I know as I've researched the Pilots, because they are, this book became, I read it every year, and anybody who can see my cover right now can tell that it's falling apart literally at the seams. I'm keeping it together with bubble gum and spit. And every time I open the book, and now I have to be even more careful where I open, I just laugh out loud with some of the anecdotes, some of the stories, some of the episodes that Jim Bouton relates about that Pilot team. And it's about the characters on that Pilot team and all across baseball. But what I like about Bouton's book, and I think this is why it resonates with so many baseball fans and nonfiction enthusiasts, that Bouton takes a precious and sacred game like baseball, and it is sacred to the baseball fans, and he peels away, kind of like an onion, peels away the layers of skin, and I hope I keep my metaphor intact here, and he peels away all the different layers of what really goes on in a baseball season, not just with the games themselves, but with the players and what goes on, the psychology, the physical toll and psychological toll and emotional that it takes on a ball player. And I know that sounds kind of fuzzy and all the rest of it, but Bouton does go on in length to really talk about the impact that baseball, if you're a major league player, the impact it can have on domestic tranquility. And of course, Bouton was married at the time. He had 3 children, had adopted a boy. And he talks about one of the things he hates about the game is how he is just traded or dealt or released or sent down or brought up. And he's going to different cities. And in the meantime, he either has to pack his family and leave with him or leave them behind because he doesn't know how long. But each time it takes a toll, not just psychological and physical bonds of the family, but also the financial problems that the family can have. And of course, Bouton that year, he starts out in Tempe. He does make the team and goes to Seattle. About 2 weeks later, he is demoted to Vancouver. So now you're talking about a different country. Then he's brought back up. Then he's sent, I believe, he spends some time on the Hawaiian Islands, either playing like a whole mass of games down there for Vancouver. And then he's brought up again has some success. He basically stays with the team from July to August and then is dealt to the Houston Astros. And he also talks about having, I think, a residency still in New Jersey from his time spent with the Yankees. You know, one of the things about Bouton, what makes him legitimate is that it's fun. He was an outsider because at the time in baseball, he was a college educated pitcher, had gone to Western Michigan. I don't know whether he had his degree yet from Western Michigan. He does, I believe, earn it, or he does earn his college. But many of the players were really not, many of them were not college educated. It's not that they're saying anything about that, but, you know, they were coming really from the rural farms of the Midwest and the South and all the rest of it. So Bouton, he himself, was really an outsider in a game that he loved. And of course, even as a kid, grew up in two areas. He grew up in Illinois and grew up in New York. So even as a kid, he's moving around too. But he does talk about the constant travel and the impact it takes on the family. But mixed in with all of these kind of revelations that he provides the reader are the great stories. And it's not the great stories. Look, the reason I did this baseball show was that, and I did that cartoon, was because of a guy by the name of Al Ferrara. The inspiration for this show was one of the few times Howard didn't give me the idea, or we didn't talk about it, or like he sent me something. I actually found this idea, Al Ferrara, because to me he has one of the great quotes of all time. And I was watching a Batman episode, waiting to do a basketball game. And sure enough, I have my computer next to me and I look up the episode and I look up who the main characters are. And it was like Tallulah Bankhead as the Black Widow and her henchmen. And many of the henchmen in these shows, or many of the extras in these shows, especially if you were a Dodger or an Angel back in the 60s, they would get off-season jobs as maybe like stepmen or extras. Well, lo and behold, who do you think the extra was? Was Al Ferrara, who was a Brooklyn Dodger and an LA Dodger and a guy from Brooklyn, New York, whose dream was to play for the Dodgers and in fact gets that dream fulfilled. And he makes this great observation. And I hope I don't lose you guys now here. And he said, I wanted to be a big league baseball player so I could see my picture on a bubblegum card. Who here, who played the great game, either in their backyard or at the schoolyard or on the baseball diamond, in high school, college, in the lower minors, didn't want their face on a baseball card? Yeah, a little egotistical, but I also think it revealed your love for the game, and also the fact that if you ever had your face grace the cover of a Topps cardboard paper card, you felt like you made it and that you accomplished something that not too many people can do in life. In fact, that's another thing that Bouton peels away, kind of the success and the feeling of success you get as a ball player for making it. And he actually gives you the secret for making it. And that is just that many of them have unbelievable, unbridled, I'd like to say, confidence in their abilities. Not egotistical, but they were just always sure. And you have to admire players, anybody who has that really a feeling of confidence that even when they fail, let's say they strike out with the bases loaded, 2 out in the 9th inning with the winning run at third base, they don't get it to the point where it plays in their mind. They just say, whoop, I'll just get him another day. That takes unbelievable confidence and secure, and really that you are secure in who you are and what you are and where you're going. And I think Bouton does reveal that he talks about these ball players, you know, they were stars all coming together. And he talks about the beauty of this game from that point of view, that whether he actually reveals it, I think he implies it, that he got a charge at a meeting different people from different parts of the world, different parts of the country, different points of view. He did like to debate politically, anything on baseball. You know, many of his teammates thought he was kind of an oddball To a certain extent, he was, because he was an outsider, like I said, college educated, with many of them not having college educations. And Bouton brings that about brilliantly in this book. And of course, Al Ferrari, if you're a Met fan, you know that Al Ferrari at least made baseball history by being the bookend strikeouts of Tom Seaver's famous 10 strikeouts in a row, done April of 1970. Ferrara started the strikeout and finished it. And Seaver won that game, and I didn't realize this. He won the game 2-1. And the only run he surrendered was a solo home run, obviously, to Al Ferrara. So Ferrara strikes out twice and hits a home run off Tom Seaver in the day that Seaver makes history. And, of course, Ferrara is part of history. One thing I did like about Ferrara is he feels, and I was reading the Saber on him, the little bios that Society of American Baseball Research provide, and they do an excellent job. And it's a myriad of writers. But he talks about the fact, and I think he is being very honest about his abilities. He doesn't think he could have been a superstar, but had he played on a different team other than the Dodgers, his favorite team, but yet, he owes the Dodgers a lot. He felt that if he played for a lesser team, he might have been a better player, gotten more games, more at-bats, etc. As it was, there were a couple of years with the Padres where he hit 14, 15 home runs, so he had a little bit of power. I know that he did have an injury. The Saber article talks about, I think he broke his ankle, but he does say that had I not come up with the Dodgers, they had a number of outfielders that were ahead of him, and he really does imply that they were probably better than them. He had Howard, the two Davises, Tommy and Willie Davis. He had Ron Fairley, played a little bit in the outfield and first base. So all those guys got in his way. Maybe had he played for a lesser team, maybe the Mets, he might have been maybe a 20-70 man, hitting 260, and maybe had 6-7 solid seasons that way, where you say, pretty good player. Not a Hall of Famer, pretty good player. But loved playing for the Dodgers, his team from Brooklyn, and he was from Brooklyn. Got a ring, 63 Dodgers. Actually got a hit. I think he's 1-for-1 in the World Series, so he ends his World Series career with a perfect batting average of 1,000. And later in his career, the Dodgers do give him a job in the front office. So overall, he never feels like a victim. He feels very blessed. And maybe with a little luck or whatever, things are different. Even with Bouton, Bouton was a pretty good pitcher when he came up. He won 20 in 18 games. I think he won 20 in 62. The Yankees won the World Series, so he's got a World Series ring. He had 18 wins the following year. And then in 64, I believe he got into that World Series, even though he's 4-15. And really that his sore arm after the 63 season destroys his career. But nevertheless, he rises kind of like a phoenix out of the ashes. He gets signed or he gets drafted by Seattle, makes the ball club, writes the diary, and maybe for him, his real gift to baseball was maybe not the 38 games he won for those pennant-winning Yankees, but of course, one of the great books of all time. And it was ranked, I think, as a top 100 book in American literature. And some great episodes in it as well. Here's the one quote I want to say. He actually nicknames him, and the Pilots nickname, the MVP of 1969, Harmon Killebrew, who I just loved. I just loved his name. I loved this particular baseball card, but they nicknamed him in Ball 4 the Fat Kid. Well, the Fat Kid in 69 owned the American League to the tune of 49 homers, 145 RBIs, 140 some odd walks. He played every game that year, 162. And the reason why that's important is that in 68, he pulled a hamstring muscle in the All-Star game, I think in the first inning, trying to stretch for a short hop ball, and I think it got away. And that was the play that allowed Willie Mays to score the only run scored in the Astrodome in one of probably the worst. I've watched the game. It is really terrible. You can understand why the Astrodome, fortunately, was torn down. They got a new ballpark down there. It was just a mess. And Killebrew only played 100 games, probably hurt the Twins' chances in 68, but nobody was going to catch the Tigers. That was just their year. And, of course, this fella is by the name of Fred Talbot. Now, why I love Talbot, you have to read. I really can't quote the book necessarily because I have to give you too much context. But what I can tell you is this, is that, and this added, I think, some true realism to the game, and that is the fact that Boughton is writing this as a guy who, because of the knuckleball, is figuratively and literally hanging by his fingernails, staying in the major leagues with the knuckleball. And the more he tries, that's the only grip he has on the game. As a result of that, he has some great conversations, and I'm going to put that in quotations, great conversations with the pitching coach, Sal Magli, which many of you can read about. They are funny. And Magli, of course, was Sal the Barber, good pitcher. And, of course, Joel Schultz, who was the manager, had come from the Cardinals and their winning ways of the 67, 68, may have even been a coach on their 64 team. But he was under Red Shaney's in 67 and 68 and was brought in as the manager of the Seattle Pilots their first year, Joel Schultz. And his discussions or conversations are legendary in the book. But getting back to my point, I think what adds to Jim Boughton so much is that he had time because he wasn't an everyday player. He certainly wasn't a superstar on that team. Actually, you would consider, here, I'll give you some trivia on that. The only quote-unquote superstars on the team were Don Mincher and Mike Hegan, and then, to a certain extent, two guys, Tommy Davis and Tommy Harper. Now, Harper would have great stats the following year with the Brewers. He would be the Brewers' first All-Star. He did not make the All-Star team with the Pilots, but these two guys make it. And you can see by this, Mike Hegan, he is picked for the All-Star game, but he was injured and did not appear. Mincher appears, I believe, in the game and goes 0 for 1 in the 69 World's All-Star game in Washington, D.C. And, of course, I didn't realize this. Sal Magli pitched for the St. Louis Cardinals. I remember him I remember his career as being with the Giants. But you got to remember, people don't realize this. And this is what Boughton's talking about. Many of the players never stay with their original team that drafts them. And Bill James actually proves this too, that there are really, when you think about very few players who stay with the franchise that originally drafted them or signed them. And that, you talk about even the great Yankee teams. Those Yankee teams were constantly in turnover mode. Even the core four Yankees of the 90s and stuff. Take a look at their bench players. They're moving in guys, trading for guys, signing new guys. Very rarely, even the Reds of 75 and 76, take a look. They had different role players on their bench, a couple of different pitchers. So my whole point is that, yes, you remember a team for maybe 3 or 4 players, and they seem to always play with your team your whole life. And you think that's the same for all the other players, but it's not. These guys are on the constant move. I mean, Don Mincher, I just mentioned before, he played for the Minnesota Twins in 65, so he's a teammate of the Fat Kid. He goes on to play with the 72 Oakland A's and wins actually a World Series with them. And Tommy Davis, who was, and we've talked about him before, had he not hurt his ankle, he was a really good hitter. Line drive hitter, did play probably in 2 pitching ballparks. Los Angeles, Dodger Stadium, and then I remember him for a long career with the Orioles, maybe about 4 or 5 years. But he was like a 12 at his height. You would say you could pencil him in for maybe 12 to 15 home runs if he was playing like 150 games, maybe 80 RBIs, and would hit, let's say, 290 to 300. He was a really good player. Like I said, though, he got injured early in his career. Really, I think he broke his ankle and was an okay defensive player, but that really turned him into a mediocre defensive player, but he still was able to keep his hitting. But he plays for the Pilots. He, like Bouton, gets dealt to the Astros. And in fact, in the story in Ball 4, he and Davis both meet. And Davis, of course, had already secured his career. He had led the league in RBIs in 62. He had led the league in batting average. And he was if he wasn't a superstar, he was definitely a star. And then he goes to a young Astro team, and they brought him in to be that veteran leadership, and also for a good bat, probably off the bench and playing maybe the last 30 games, either at first base or maybe in the outfield, or, as I said, pinch hitter, and giving them maybe 300, five homers, and maybe 20 RBIs. And I'm basing this on, let's say, 30 or 40 games. But even Davis, in a meeting, and he talks about this in the book, and of course, I don't have the time, nor I'm afraid that on this show, if I open this book, is going to fall apart on me. But Davis even talks about when he goes to a new team, no matter what his resume was before him going on this team, he had to prove himself. He had to get a big hit in a big spot. He could not add anything to a player's meeting unless he had proved himself. And for Bouton, who brings that up, it's really interesting that he says that, because I think there's a lot of truth to that no matter who you are, you got to prove yourself to your new teammates or your new company. You may come in with all of these accolades and all of these awards and all the rest of it. You still got to prove yourself. And Tommy Davis says that to Bouton. He says, I got to do something before I can even contribute, let's say, my point of view to a meeting. And it's so true. And Tommy Harper, of course, here's another great trivia question. Tommy Harper. He was gunned out in the 70 All-Star game by Johnny Bench. So a former Red, which Harper was gunned down by Johnny Bench in his home park. And on the mound was Jim Merritt, a Cincinnati Red, also in his home park. Now, I know I do some crazy stuff. I believe that's the last time a catcher in his home park threw out a runner in an all-star game in his home park. I'm just saying all that. Then you have a couple of guys, Ray Oyler and, of course, Marvin Milks. And I've mentioned him before. I don't believe this is a real card. In fact, I'm almost 99.9999%. But Marvin Milks was the general manager. And part of the beauty of Ball 4 is that Bouton not only provides you conversation between players, and I'm going a little bit distant here. One of the beauties of the thing is that Bouton had time to sit during a game, have conversations with players also sitting on the game, not just relief pitchers, but catchers who aren't playing in a game. Or if he does come into the game, he could sit in the dugout after his couple of innings were done. Now he sits and he would listen to the conversations. And of course, the beauty of this book is that not only does he talk about what ball players think about, how they act, and believe me, they're all not mature people. They're like, it's a long season. They will act like kids, doing goofy things in the dugout, doing goofy things in the locker room and in the bullpen. Like there is one episode where Bouton talks about a relief pitcher for the Orioles. And of course, anybody who's a huge Oriole fan will remember Mo Drabowsky and his great 1966 World Series performance. But apparently, I think Drabowsky was in the bullpen one night and called like a Chinese restaurant that was 1,000 miles from the ballpark and ordered takeout. So, like, ball players do some crazy things. It's a long season. That's what Bouton's point of view is. And there's a lot of time that you can sit and just chew the fat. And he talks about that. And one of the classic conversations is with Fred Talbot. Now, I would ruin it, and I don't have the time to talk about it, but Fred Talbot and a fellow by the name of Merritt Renew, who is a catcher, for that Pilot team. I love this one, how Top comes in, and I think this is a Cub uniform, but they come in and they basically whitewash or paint over the Cub thing because he was playing for a different team. He was on, I can't even see he's on the Houston Colt 45s. How about that? You play for the Colt 45s and the Seattle Pilots in your career. But there's a debate between Merritt Renew and Fred Talbot that is very funny. And for me, I can't even read it because that would ruin it. But these are the anecdote stories. And these are the things that I laugh out loud. And Boughton brilliantly brings them about in the story. Really is a good storyteller, a good wordsmith. And like I said, for every laugh he gives you, sometimes he gives you a couple of tears about nostalgia for the game, about your love for the game, and that it really doesn't, it's not about necessarily balls and strikes. It's not about the game itself. It's about life itself. In fact, he's got one of the greatest last lines in the book. I'm going to share that as I end the show. But here is Gary Bell. Now, Bell was his roommate for a time. I love those Indian uniforms. That's, I think, 1969. That's the 69 season. Bell, of course, was a pitcher for the Red Sox, let go by the Red Sox, picked up by the Pilots. Is then sent, I believe, to the Indians or the White Sox during the season. But yes, they get rid of him as well. In fact, let me just say this. Let me just go back to Fred Talbot. Talbot and, ironically, Jim Boughton. Actually, I got to tell you this. There's another episode involving Fred Talbot where they play a practical joke on him. Apparently, the Pilots had a kind of like you hit a home run, you win all sorts of money, etc. So Talbot, I think, hit a home run in a game. And of course, they made up a story where he won the game. He won money for some guy, John Smith. And John Smith, this is what they do. They say, let's play a gag on Fred Talbot. So they write a letter to Fred Talbot saying it's John Smith and that he was the guy who benefited from Talbot's home run. And he just wanted to thank him. And John Smith says, yeah, let's say I won like 10 grand or something, but he wanted to thank him and he wanted to ask him for his autograph on, let's say, a baseball card or something like that, something crazy. And at the end of it, all the guys are laughing about it because Talbot is waiting. The guy says, I think I'm going to give you a cut of the money I won. Let's say I'll send you like the money. And of course, Talbot is waiting each and every day. And of course, the guys who are in on the joke are just laughing to themselves. And finally, the funny thing is he realizes that it's a joke on him. And he does get back at Boughton, kind of he gets the last laugh on Boughton and the rest of the team. And it's a pretty funny story. And of course, I know I've kind of ruined it. You got to read the story in itself and just enjoy it. But Fred Talbot was a teammate. Unfortunately for Talbot, he missed the great Yankee dynasty. He comes to the Yankees in 1966 and 67 and in 68 when the Yankees were a second division team for the most part. And then he is unceremoniously dumped. The Pilots pick him up. Actually, the 1 year with the Pilots, he wasn't too bad. He goes 5-8. He was kind of a spot starter and reliever and finished his career with the Oakland A's in 69 and 70. In all cases for Fred, and I think this adds to the whole point of this book, is that Talbot just always kept missing the dynasties of teams that he played for. He missed it with the Yankees, and of course, he missed it with the Oakland A's. Gary Bell, I just want to go over him. For every Pilot that you would say was mediocre and substandard, you have guys like Gary Bell who had some good years. Had a 16.2 WAR, finished with over 500 record. He was 121 and 117. And of course, I'm using Baseball Reference here, so I want everyone to know that. But Bell started with Cleveland. Then he goes to Boston. So my apologies. He goes to Cleveland, goes to Boston, goes to Seattle, and his last year actually is 1969, when he finishes with the White Sox. So these are pictures, obviously, let's say 1966. Although that looks like this is a 1970 card, so maybe he got a flyer with the Indians and just didn't make the regular roster. But in 68, Bell made the All-Star team with the Red Sox. He went 11-11 that year, 3.12 ERA. The year before with the 67 Red Sox, he was 12-8, 3.16 ERA. He was a 66 All-Star with the Cleveland Indians, go 14-15, 3.22 ERA. And then in 67, he was 500, 13-13, 3.31 ERA. My whole point with him is that outside of the 67 and 68 Red Sox, he didn't really play for really great teams. I know that the Indians during his years, they were probably over 500, but they were like 82, 83 wins. And so Gary Bell was not a bad pitcher. In fact, he would be a valuable commodity today. I mean, if you can go 13-13 and pitch, ready for this? He pitched 254 innings in 1966. He pitched 226 in 1967. And the two Red Sox years, 165 and 199. So you could send him out there and he would eat up innings for you and be a help to you that way. All right, I wanted to get to these guys. Don Mincher. And I'm just going back to the roster for them. Don Mincher. This is a great one too. The leader in WAR for that Pilot team was none other than Mike Hegan, who had a 3.2. Wayne Comer tied him with a 3.2. I think Comer played for the Tigers, and then Don Mincher had a 2.6. Let me do Mincher first because he does make the All-Star team. Actually, not a bad WAR, 23. He finished with 200 home runs and a 249 batting average. So he produced, according to Baseball Reference, a typical year, if he were to play 162 games, would produce 2374, 249, 77 walks. Mincher was not a bad player. He does play for the 72 A's, does win a World Series. He got into 47 games for the A's as they brought him in more than likely for defensive purposes and for pinch hitting. Actually, after Seattle, Mincher went to Oakland, played for him in 70, 71, then went to Washington, then to Texas, then back to Oakland, where he finally got his World Series ring. And I think he would later retire and own his own sporting goods store in Alabama. But Don Mincher was, that typical slugging first baseman of the 60s and 70s. A Jimmy Gentile. Maybe not as good as the Ernie Banks and Orlando Cepeda in terms of batting average and overall ability, but would get you 20 home runs, get you 70, 80 RBIs. I know Banks and Cepeda were far better, but I think you know what I'm talking about. Even, let's say, a Lee May, who would get you 30, 90, and hit 250. Those are the kind of first basemen that the Major League Baseball had at the time, and Mincher really was that type of player. And, of course, Sal Magley was one of the coaches on the team. And I just want to go over this because I'm only showing this because I think Magley was an interesting character in this. They did not get along, even though the interesting thing about Magley was that when he was growing up, Bouton was a Giants fan when they were still in New York. Magley happened to be one of his favorite players on that team. Magley had a 119-62 mark with a 3.15 ERA. He did pitch for the Giants in 54. He was 14-6. And then his last team, 1958, was the Cardinals, where he was 2-6. And of course, Magley, I believe, went to Mexico and played in kind of like an expansion league, and then was able to come back, or he left. Yes, I believe Magley left went down to Mexico to make money, and came back to baseball and pitched for the Giants, and really had some, a 657 winning percentage. And he registered 14 saves in his career when, of course, saves were not a big thing. All right. And Magley, of course, was the pitching coach. Boughton and he did not see eye to eye. And it led for quite a few conversations that are funny. And again, I would urge you to read the book and read it cover to cover, and then, like I do, just pick it up in pieces, which I have done over the years, and go from there. And then I just want to do one other one. Mike Hegan, because he was the other all-star on that Seattle Pilot team. And remember, this all comes from me saying about the baseball card, making the baseball card. In 69, Hegan had 8 homers, 37 RBIs for the Pilots. He hit .292, drew 62 walks, scored 54 runs. He only played 95 games. So he was in and out. I know that he was used I think almost exclusively against righties, but he does make the All-Star team with a .292 batting average. Actually had 9 homers, 6 RBIs, 8 homers, 6 triples, 9 home runs. Not a bad, one of his best seasons. Actually, ready for this? If you did him baseball reference over 162 games, he averaged what he did in 1969. 9 homers, 38 RBIs, but a .242 batting average. So he hit 50 points higher than his career average of .242. Like Minchner, he does go to Oakland. He does, I believe, earn some World Series profits because he played 76 games with the A's that year. Let me just see something. No, he does play with the 72 A's and the 73 A's. So he does earn a ring with the Oakland A's as well. And then the last guy I really want to talk about before I get into some of the quotes, and that is Tommy Harper, who's probably their best player when you think about it on this team, even though he doesn't make the All-Star team. Let me just see if I can find him here as I look for him. Harper was a really good player. And it's a shame he was 28 years old. The Reds pretty much traded him away. He started out with Cincinnati. He played like second base. He played the outfield. He was really a utility player. Led the league in runs scored in 1965 with 126 runs. You know, it's amazing. I've often said this. Can you imagine if the Reds had somehow gotten a hold of Jimmy Wynn, who was a Cincinnati native, and put him in the outfield? All right, I'm not saying center field. I'm just saying in the outfield. And maybe had they kept Harper, man, how good that team would have been. Now, Harper, unfortunately, for the Big Red Machine would have been 34 or 35, but he would have probably been a pretty good player coming off the bench for the Reds. For his career, this is what he would do in 162 games, 13, 51, 257 batting average, but he would earn a 338 on-base percentage because he walked 67 times on an average in his career. Actually, his best year was 69 when he stole 73 bases, led the league, got nabbed 18 times, but drew 95 walks. And even though he hit 235, he had a 349 on-base percentage with 9 homers and 41 RBIs and 78 runs scored. Not bad. And that was Marvin Milks in the bottom. Ray Oler, of course, not a very good player for the Mariners. But the beautiful thing about Ray Oler was that he does earn a ring with the Detroit Tigers. If I can just get that, just to prove that. And of course, I can't find him. I know he played for them. But I do want to say this. Ray Oler had a 0 WAR. I've never seen that before. Usually I've seen the negatives. He does play with Detroit in 68. Hit one homer, hit 135. But hey, he's got something I don't, a major league career. And he's got another thing I don't have, and that is a Major League World Series ring. I just want to read the last line in this, as I always do, because it's so important. I think it It really is kind of important. And before I leave, he says this: Jim O'Toole and I started out even in the spring. He wound up with the Ross Eversols and I with a new lease on life. That was like a semi-pro team in Ohio. And as I daydreamed of being Fireman of the Year in 1970, I wondered what the dreams of Jim O'Toole are like these days. Then I thought, would I do that? When it's over for me, would I be hanging on with the Ross Eversols? I went down deep, and the answer I came up with was yes. Yes, I would. You see, you spend a good piece of your life gripping a baseball, and in the end, it turns out that it was the other way around all the time. Enlightening words from an average pitcher. Jim Bouton, ball four. This is Will O'Toole. Thank you again for joining us on Park Ridge Sports History. See you next week.